country, and more than 20,000 of those refugees are at the Rakuba camp, excuse me. Almost a third of the Ethiopian refugees are children, including hundreds who, like Daniel, are unaccompanied, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. They're fleeing a conflict that began when Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed launched a military offensive in the Tigray region. Abiy accused Tigray's regional leaders of attacking government defense posts and trying to steal military equipment. But even before that, a long simmering feud between the government and the leaders of the Tigray region have been barreling toward conflict for months. The violence has killed countless civilians and precipitated a humanitarian and geopolitical crisis that threatens to destabilize not just Ethiopia, but also the entire East Africa region. The conflict is essentially a political one between the current government and a group that was defeated in the 2018 elections. But because political parties in Ethiopia are based on ethnic identity, there's an ethnic component to it as well. For most of the past 3 decades, Tigrayans, an ethnic group that makes up just 7% of the population, controlled Ethiopia's government. During that time, the country became an oasis of stability in a turbulent region. But the Tigrayans in power also repressed all political oppression, which led to broad dissatisfaction. In 2018, Abiy, a young reformer and from the opposing party, became prime minister. And he moved quickly to sideline the Tigrayans who long held power. Tensions have been brewing ever since. Trekking for hours and days. Violence in Tigray continues, and some 2.3 million children of Tigray don't have access to humanitarian assistance, according to UNICEF, the UN Agency for Children. Many of the unaccompanied children say they were separated from their families as they bolted from their homes in the middle of the night, trekking for hours and days with nothing but the clothes on their backs to reach safety. It's quite heartbreaking, says Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner on Refugees. I have hardly seen such a high level of people separated from their families, many children separated. At Rakuba camp, an arid bowl of land sandwiched between a few hills, a sense of permanence is already taking hold. Even as they dream of one day going back home, many refugees say they are determined to establish a future, if delicate and uncertain, here. The waves of refugees who have poured into Sudan describe hastily leaving their homes at harvest and encountering violent militias and dead bodies along the way. Prime Minister Abiy has declared the offensive over in Tigray, but there are still widespread reports of fighting and accounts of violent right violations such as ethnic cleansing, sexual violence, and using starvation as a war tactic. Many of the Tigrayans at Rakuba say that uncertainty and the trauma of what they saw and experienced as they fled will keep them from coming home anytime soon. Growing up too fast. For many refugees at Rakuba, their changed circumstances have also meant growing up too fast. Talkti Iregawi, 17, who registered as an unaccompanied minor, goes around the camp each day by selling plastic-wrapped cakes from a box hanging from his neck. With the small profit he makes, he's able to purchase coffee and tea and even deep-fried donuts sprinkled with sugar. Atalki lived in Maikadra town in Tigray, where hundreds of people were reportedly killed in a massacre in early November. But after the war broke out, he fled, eventually heading for the Sudanese border. In our life, we have never seen bad actions like this, he says of the war. Prime Minister Biden doesn't like us. He doesn't like us staying in Tigray. Atalki puts on the demeanor of an adult when talking about his ordeal, broadening his shoulders, making his voice hoarse and smirking. I was not afraid, he says, when asking about making the difficult trip to Sudan. I was not, he insists, saying that he was already ready to defend himself from any harm, 100%. But when he bumped into friends from home at a refugee camp, he says, I was sobbing. The sudden displacement has also been devastating for parents such as Berhanu Kiros, 30, and his wife in Kaibari Berhanu. I'm really bad at pronouncing this. In Kaibari, 24, was in the hospital in Humera, having just given birth to their first children, twins. When shelling of the town began, the couple fled, and Berhanu feared for his wife's health as she continued bleeding. After 2 days, they were separated and fled again, and for days didn't know if the other had survived. This was the first experience of war, Berhanu says, talking about how the conflict coincided with the momentous time of becoming a father. We came from a nation of dignity and pride, and now we are here begging with our children, he says. The country has collapsed. It's heartbreaking. The Norwegian Refugee Council has set up makeshift classrooms for refugee children. Here, refugee teachers instruct hundreds of students in morning and afternoon shifts, tutoring them in math, science, and languages. I want to know ABC so that I can speak English, as Gebres Christos 7 says to an interpreter. On a recent evening, 17-year-old T says he's had a successful day and is about to sell the last of his cakes. But more than anything, he longs for the familiar streets where he grew up in Ethiopia. I wish I could go back, he says, eyes downcast. I miss home. All right. So would everybody for me transition to the Unit 7 document? The Unit 7 document. You should be able to put that right into Notability. Okay? And let's go like this. The first part of our document that we're going to do together today is just this first 5-pointer right here. Okay? Now, let me take attendance of the kids that are online real quick here before I forget. Awesome. Okay. So your screen should look a little, or excuse me, your sheet on Notability should look a little something like this. And already the first question, okay, which is your opinion, pretty easy. Okay? Read the following excerpt from Chief Justice John Roberts. We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. What do you think of Chief Justice Roberts meant when he said this? Do you agree or disagree, and why? Got me? I'm going to give you a little time to respond to that. Go. So that first part there, they said, we do not have Obama judges, we don't have Trump judges. What do you think that means? What do you think that Chief Justice John Roberts was saying there?
The justices that the president appoints isn't necessarily just the president's views.
Right, not their little errand boy or something, right? They're there, and they have their own working mind.
Yeah.
right? And they're not just a figurehead that's put into a position or a puppet that's controlled and is just going to do whatever the president wants. And that's what I think he's trying to say there. Okay, very good. So, and maybe you agree with that, maybe you disagree with that. Okay, but the next part kind of agrees with what Leo just brought up, which is judges in the United States are currently selected in one of two ways. They are either appointed, chosen by an elected official, or they are directly elected by the people. Brainstorm the possible pros and cons of each. Okay, what would be the pro and con of having an elected official versus one that's appointed? Does that make sense, guys? Good. I'll give you one pro. When you appoint an official or you just let somebody choose, that's done pretty quick, isn't it? Got me? It's done relatively speaking. Anytime you put something through a vote, folks, it takes a while. You guys got me? There's a reason that, like, in times of, like, there's a reason the military doesn't, just allow their troops to, like, vote. Who wants to go take that hill? They have to run it with orders because it's efficient. Got me? Okay? Because when you make orders like that and you can make them quickly, it's efficient and it's done fast. Okay? Democracy takes a while if you're going to allow people to vote. Okay? Any questions about the first part of that document? Okay, anybody need more time with that? We're good? Okay, I want everybody to watch this short video. The next part of our Google Doc, or excuse me, our Unit 7 doc, you need this video to be able to answer it. So I'm going to mute myself and play this for the class. Give me just a sec.
We've all been there. It's a normal Wednesday and then your phone vibrates.
What? A Supreme Court justice is going to retire.
And suddenly the political world is like...
And we have just learned that Justice Anthony Kennedy will be retiring.
It's the decision that could reshape the Supreme Court for a generation and be a defining moment for the Trump presidency.
This will be the biggest change in the Supreme Court in at least half a century.
In the U.S., our process for selecting Supreme Court justices is pretty well known. It usually begins when a sitting justice, like Anthony Kennedy, sends a letter to the president announcing his retirement. According to Article 2 of the Constitution, it's then the president's job to nominate a new justice. The name of the president's nominee is then sent to the U.S. Senate, where they are either confirmed or rejected by a majority vote. This process has evolved over the years, but as of today, those are the textbook basics. But then on the other side, there's real life, which goes something like this. As soon as the resignation drops, people go haywire. Protests are up, lawmakers grandstand, and the nomination process turns into political football, which actually makes sense because today, when Congress, the political parties, and even the Supreme Court are divided, everything from abortion law to environmental policy to the way unions work literally hinges on the one person the president nominates. All right, so why was the Supreme Court established in the first place, and what is it supposed to do?
The Supreme Court was established to provide a final court in the United States to give definitive interpretations regarding what the Constitution means. And that's important because under the United States' first Constitution, called the Articles of Confederation, we didn't have a Supreme Court. The result was many interpretations of the law and no real consensus.
The Supreme Court has the final word on what's legal in our country, until we the people amend the Constitution. In the early 1800s, under Chief Justice John Marshall, the Supreme Court established the power to nullify laws created by the other two branches of government. It's called the concept of judicial review. The thing is, you don't have direct control over it. The Supreme Court was designed so that its justices don't have to pander to majority whims, which means it's the only branch of our federal government you don't get to elect.
I mean, think about what happens if we don't like the president, if we don't like our senator or a member of Congress. What can we do? Eventually vote them out of office. But we can't vote the Supreme Court out of office because, what, the president appoints, the Senate confirms, and subject to good behavior, they're there for life. And this poses a problem because at least many of us think that in American democracy, that policies, laws should be made by those people who are electorally accountable. What I mean by that, by people who we elect. Yet the Supreme Court, unelected individuals, 9 people, get to make some of the most critical decisions in our society, and we cannot elect them.
Over time, and especially now when the other branches of government seem unable to get anything done, the Supreme Court has become a major player in resolving both legal and perhaps political issues.
I know you were deeply disappointed in the Supreme Court's ruling on same-sex marriage, and you called for, before the decision actually, you called for term limits.
As Justice Scalia, I think, very brilliantly wrote, what you now have is that our country is being ruled by a majority of 9 lawyers who are not representative of the population as a whole.
So why don't we give Supreme Court justices term limits?
The hope was by having them appointed by the president, subject to Senate confirmation, it would insulate them from politics so that they could make decisions based upon what they thought the law was as opposed to what politics was.
On top of this, the framers never intended for our politics to be partisan. When the Supreme Court was established by the Constitution, there weren't any political parties in the United States.
When George Washington, our first president, left office in 1796, he gave a farewell speech sort of bemoaning rather, I should say, the rise of political parties and how that would be so divisive. And so our Constitution really isn't set up in a way to recognize political parties. We figured out a way to kind of gerrymander or jerry-rig to get them in there, but doesn't really fit, and our framers did not really like political parties.
So have life terms and the appointment process put the Supreme Court above politics?
One of the best predictors of how a Supreme Court justice is going to vote, look at which president appointed that person. It's pretty good predictions. Republican versus Democrat, we can almost figure out how they're going to vote. And in fact, there's lots of studies in political science that really say that political biases, views of the justices, political views matter. We're hoping that we're not saying there's just politicians in robes, but sometimes they kind of look like politicians in robes.
There have been many famous cases that prove just how influential the courts are in America. Everything from Dred Scott versus Sanford in 1857, which denied citizenship to African Americans, free or enslaved, to Roe v. Wade in 1973, which found that women have a constitutional right to an abortion. More recently, it legalized same-sex marriages across the country, upheld a president's travel ban, and said that states can now make companies collect sales tax on purchases you make over the internet. Which brings us to our main question. With ideas as important as these hanging in the balance, should the people elect their Supreme Court justices?
Okay, in 37 states in the United States, judges are elected. On the one hand, state judges really become sort of representatives, on the bench. The people get to select them, get to vote for them, which means they're held accountable directly by the people that way. However, we also know, and there's some evidence that suggests that elected judges are less likely to support criminal due process rights. And I say that because they might be afraid that if they support defendant rights, they might not get elected. And we've also seen in the last 15 to 20 years, judicial elections become highly polarized and high stakes, high dollar contests to where there are major fights with replacing judges through elections. The upshot being, it's just not clear that either elections or an appointment process necessarily takes judges out of politics. It's a different type of politics, it's a different way of selecting them, but it's hard to really make an argument that one system is better than another.
So as you've heard, there are certainly ways we can change this part of our political system, which leads to you. If we were founding our country today, should we be able to elect our Supreme Court justices? And should they have term limits? How would this game of political football play out then?
Hi, this is Joseph, the producer of America from Scratch, and if you'd like to hear more of my voice, you can do that by listening to the America from Scratch podcast, which can be found on iTunes and other places where podcasts live, or if you need some help, there's a link that leads to it in the description.
Oh, you guys couldn't hear me because my volume was off. Do you guys online have any questions here? I just put that Civics 101 podcast on the judicial branch. That's available, and that'll take you about 20 minutes to get going on that Unit 7 stuff, so I would get going on that. If you have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, this satisfies your attendance requirement for today. You can make it a great day.